She was erased from her career, her reputation shattered by a billionaire's wife with a perfect smile and a deadly secret. But Nia Carter, once labeled difficult and discarded, refused to vanish. Instead, she uncovered a $12 million scandal, exposed the lies, and faced her enemy in front of New York's elite, with the world watching. This isn't just a story of revenge, it's a story of reclaiming power with truth. Where are you watching from today? Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that dares to speak the truth. At 29, I thought I had finally earned my place in the world I had once only watched from behind restaurant counters and bus stop benches. My name is Nia Carter, and 6 months ago, I believed I was invincible. I wasn't born into influence. My earliest memories were of my mother folding laundry in the back room of a motel where she worked 12-hour shifts, and of me sitting on the floor beside her, drawing brand logos for magazines on scraps of paper. I was raised on food stamps, ambition, and the kind of silence you learn to keep in your gut when your classmates make fun of your shoes. By the time I was 16, I had a full-time night job, straight A's, and a quiet vow stitched into my soul. I was going to escape. I clawed my way out through scholarships, loans, and working 3 jobs while getting my marketing degree. I became addicted to progress. Every test I passed, every internship I landed, every executive who remembered my name was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and the girl who used to collect change for lunch. When I landed the role of senior brand director at Marcellus & Co., one of Manhattan's most elite luxury firms, I thought I had finally arrived. And yet, the first crack in that illusion came on a Thursday night in February. The Langford Gala for Global Education was the kind of event where fortunes whispered across crystal glasses and reputations were solidified with eye contact. It was held at the Park Avenue Crown, a Baroque monster of a hotel with ceilings that looked hand-painted by angels and hallways that echoed with quiet privilege. The air itself felt expensive, floral, sharp, cold. I wore an emerald silk gown that clung just right and reminded me I belonged here. My heels clicked confidently across the marble floor. I'd done this before. Shaken hands with CEOs, toasted champagne with royalty-adjacent donors, charmed clients worth more than my entire upbringing. I wasn't just surviving in this world, I was thriving in it. I was speaking with a managing partner from a Swiss cosmetics company when it happened. A jostle, a slip, and my flute of golden champagne tipped forward, slow motion, arching straight into the chest of a woman whose entire presence made me feel suddenly, irreparably small. The liquid hit a dress so white and pristine it looked like it had never been touched by dust, let alone sticky alcohol. The crowd gasped, an elegant collective inhale. The music didn't stop, but it shifted. The eyes turned, and I looked up into the face of Isabel Langford. She was tall, stunning, and terrifying in that detached, practiced way that only old money can perfect. The wife of Ethan Langford, tech billionaire, media darling, and the queen bee of every socialite board in Manhattan, Isabel wasn't just part of the elite. She was the elite. She wore a custom Givenchy gown that likely cost more than my graduate education and diamonds that could fund a scholarship program for a small country. But it wasn't the loss of fabric or sparkle that made her eyes ice over. It was something else. A calculation. A decision. "I'm so sorry," I blurted, reaching into my clutch for tissues or something, anything. "Please let me pay for cleaning or replacement. I didn't." She raised one manicured hand to silence me. Her lips pulled into a slow smile that didn't touch her eyes. "People like you," she said, her voice smooth and cruel, just loud enough for the small circle forming around us to hear, "don't belong here." The words hit harder than any scream would have. They were meant to slice, to humiliate, to put me in my place. And judging by the way the crowd stiffened, they did. I stood frozen, my apology caught somewhere between my throat and my pride. I saw someone whisper to someone else. I saw a waiter glance away, ashamed. I saw my reflection in the glass of a nearby display case, and for the first time in years I saw the girl I used to be. Uninvited, unwelcome. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying her voice, those 4 words over and over again. "You don't belong here." I told myself she was just upset, that it was just a moment. But I knew better. People like Isabel didn't just have power, they wielded it like a scalpel. And I had just given her a reason to cut. Still, I pushed through. Monday morning came, and I marched into Marcellus & Co. with my chin up and my focus sharp. I had 3 major deliverables that week, and a campaign pitch for a luxury travel brand worth over $5 million. I wasn't going to let one rich woman's insult undo everything I had worked for. By noon, I had already reviewed the Q2 projections and was prepping for my 3 p.m. presentation. I felt good, almost in control again, until my phone buzzed. 2:47 p.m. My boss, Miles, was calling. "Nia, my office, now." His voice was clipped, unnatural. He was usually charming to a fault. My stomach twisted. I walked in expecting some kind of urgent campaign fire, or maybe a client request that required late-night scrambling. What I found was Miles pacing behind his desk, his tie loosened, hair askew. He looked like he hadn't slept. "We've got a situation," he said. He didn't look at me, just handed me a folder. I opened it. The Morrison Group, one of our biggest clients, a $2.2 million account. "Pulled out?" I asked slowly. "Not just pulled out, they demanded that you be removed from any future contact. No explanation, just gone." I blinked. "Their pitch loved me," I said, almost to myself. "They emailed last week saying we nailed the campaign narrative." Miles finally looked at me, and what I saw there wasn't anger. It wasn't even confusion, it was pity. "There have been whispers, concerns about your conduct, about you being difficult. A few board members said you've been aggressive." I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Difficult. Aggressive. The 2 most lethal words they use on women like me. The next day, another client pulled out. Then another. By Thursday, the Sinclair Foundation, whom I'd personally courted for 8 months, sent a polite, sterile email thanking us for our proposal and declining further partnership. No one gave a reason. No one answered my follow-up messages. No one returned my calls. It was like I had become radioactive. By the end of the week, Miles asked to restructure my role, to give me space and time to recalibrate. I knew what that meant. What I didn't know, what I couldn't quite grasp yet, was just how calculated this was. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fallout from one spilled drink. This was war. Someone had taken aim at me, strategically, surgically, and was destroying me from the inside out. And the only person who had the motive, the reach, and the chilling smile to do that was Isabel Langford. She didn't just want to humiliate me, she wanted to erase me. But what she didn't know, what she never could have understood, was that I'd been erased before, and I had clawed my way back from nothing once already. I wasn't done yet. The following Monday arrived under a dull gray sky, the kind that always made New York feel a little heavier, a little meaner. I wrapped myself in my camel wool coat, pulled my hair back tight, and walked into Marcellus & Co., like I hadn't spent the weekend spiraling between fury and disbelief. I hadn't answered Ava's texts. I hadn't even told her what happened at the gala. I didn't have the words yet. But I had a plan, or at least the shell of one. Show up. Do the work. Don't let them see you bleed. The building's marble lobby greeted me like it always had, cold, polished, and echoing with shoes more expensive than mine. But something was different. The receptionist barely looked up when I said good morning. One of the junior associates who usually idolized me kept his eyes down when we passed in the elevator. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe not. By 10 a.m., I was in the war room preparing for the Montclair pitch, a European leather brand expanding into North America. I'd spent weeks building a sleek, data-driven campaign around generational legacy and aspirational rebellion. I knew every slide by heart. I clicked through them in the empty room, speaking aloud like the clients were already there. Luxury is no longer about exclusivity, I rehearsed. It's about identity, story, and we make your story unforgettable. My voice was steady, my hands weren't. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from the assistant to Elaine Park, the Montclair liaison. It was curt and unsettling. "Apologies, Nia. Montclair has decided to cancel today's presentation. They've gone in a different direction." I read it twice. Then again. I stared at the rows of polished chairs set up for the meeting. The projector hummed quietly. The silence around me screamed. This was the second cancellation in less than a week. The Morrison Group had blindsided us on Friday, and now Montclair, both of which had given glowing feedback just days ago, were severing ties with no warning and no reason. I walked into Miles' office, still gripping my phone. "They canceled," I said, trying to keep my tone professional. He looked up from his laptop, eyes weary. "I know." "You know?" They called me first. He didn't sound surprised, or even that upset. Just tired. There's a pattern here, Miles. You have to see it. He closed his laptop slowly. It's not just Montclair. I waited. The Hartwell Corporation pulled their account this morning, too. Effective immediately. Hartwell was a family-run design firm I'd courted for almost a year. I'd flown to Charleston twice, met with their matriarch, even attended her granddaughter's piano recital. We were days away from signing the final contract. What reason? I asked. None. Just said they were uncomfortable proceeding. I laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. Uncomfortable with what? He didn't answer. That afternoon I tried calling Hartwell myself. No one picked up. I left voicemails that I knew would never be returned. The line had gone cold. I tried Montclair. I tried Morrison. I even tried a few low-level contacts I knew at each firm. Nothing. No callbacks. No emails. It was like someone had flipped a switch and shut me out of my own life. And it wasn't just the clients. That week, I watched my world shrink inch by inch. Coworkers who used to greet me with smiles and inside jokes now barely met my eyes. The assistant who always kept my espresso just the way I liked it forgot it 2 days in a row. The weekly leadership meeting, where my name used to dominate the agenda, now barely included me at all. By Wednesday, even HR had scheduled a routine check-in, citing vague concerns about team synergy. It felt like being slowly suffocated in a room I used to command. Ava, when I finally called her that night, listened in silence. "Tell me I'm imagining this," I said. "You're not," she replied, "and I think we both know who's behind it." I sank into my couch and stared at the ceiling. "Isabel Langford is poisoning the well," Ava continued. "She's pulling strings, whispering in ears." "But how?" I asked, frustrated. "These clients don't know her personally. She's not even in marketing." "She doesn't need to be," Ava said. "She's in social circles that make calls behind closed doors. You think Montclair's board doesn't golf with her husband's friends? Or that Hartwell's matriarch doesn't sit on a charity committee with her? This is how people like her operate." I pressed the phone harder against my ear. Whispers are currency in their world, Naya. All she has to do is plant a doubt and walk away. You don't need proof when you have access. I hung up not long after. Ava was right. I knew she was right, but it didn't make it easier. On Thursday, I walked into the break room for coffee and caught 2 junior execs talking in hushed voices. The moment they saw me, they stopped. One of them gave me a tight smile and left. The other avoided eye contact as he poured himself water, then exited without a word. I stood there for a while, coffee untouched. By the time I sat down at my desk, there was a new email waiting for me. From the Sinclair Foundation, the nonprofit focused on youth mental health we'd been negotiating with for months. After careful consideration, we've decided to pursue alternative creative representation. We wish you and your firm continued success. I didn't even blink, just closed the laptop. Later that day, Miles called me back into his office. "I've been in this industry for over 20 years, he said, his voice strangely gentle, "and I've never seen something like this." "Something like what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Someone's targeting you, Nia, specifically you." I stared at him. "You're a rising star," he continued. "You built trust with clients who don't trust easily. You brought in more revenue in 1 year than some execs do in 5. But in the last 10 days, every account you've touched has vanished. That's not normal. That's not market fluctuation. That's someone pulling levers behind the curtain." My throat was dry. "You believe me?" I whispered. He sighed. "I believe something's happening, but that doesn't change the fact that your name is starting to carry risk." It was a soft sentence, but it might as well have been a blade. "I'm not the liability here," I said. "The person sabotaging me is." "I know," he replied, "but perception is reality in this world. Perception is reality." That phrase sat heavy in my gut as I walked home that evening, the winter wind slicing through my coat. It was true. It didn't matter that I was innocent. It didn't matter that I had worked 10 times harder than anyone else to be there. If enough people believed I was a problem, then I was the problem. It was a rigged game. And Isabel Langford was the one dealing the cards. The worst part wasn't even the smear campaign. It was how easily it worked. How quickly people who once praised me stopped taking my calls. How smoothly the ground beneath my feet shifted from firm to free fall. All it took was a few whispers, a few suggestions made at the right tables, and I became toxic. On Friday morning, I sat at my desk staring at my inbox. I had 0 meetings, 0 tasks, no clients to respond to, no projects to finish, just the quiet, suffocating sound of exile. I opened a blank document, typed one word, why. Then I deleted it, because I already knew why. People like Isabel didn't just dislike people like me, they feared us. Feared what it meant if someone who came from nowhere could stand beside them, could challenge them, could shine brighter in a world they were born into. And when fear wasn't enough, they turned to destruction. But what she hadn't counted on, what she would never understand, was that I wasn't done. Not even close. 3 weeks after the Langford Gala, I stood outside the Guggenheim Museum in the biting wind, the invitation in my clutch shaking along with my fingers. My coat was too thin for the weather, but I hadn't dared wear anything bulkier. It didn't match the dress. The deep navy silk wrapped around me like armor, though truthfully, it felt more like a disguise. Beneath the fabric and smoky eyeliner was a woman fraying at the edges. I had called in my last favor to get here. A friend from undergrad, Jules, whose mother was on the museum board, owed me a solid from when I helped her through a brutal thesis defense. One phone call, one awkwardly delivered, I know it's been a while, but... And here I was, faking calm at the door of an exclusive art benefit attended by the exact people who were currently ghosting me out of their contact lists. The moment I stepped through the glass doors, the temperature shifted. Not just the actual warmth from the heaters, but the social temperature. Conversations faltered as I walked in. Not completely. Just enough for me to feel it. A ripple, a pause, a whisper I wasn't meant to catch. The music resumed. Waiters glided past with trays of champagne. My heels clicked against the polished stone as I moved deeper into the crowd. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but I didn't. Because somewhere in this glowing palace of glass and oil paintings was Isabel Langford. I scanned the room, eyes sharp. I didn't expect her to hide. Women like Isabel didn't need to. They existed with the confidence of royalty, knowing the world would bend before them. And there she was, in the East Wing, under a soaring atrium that made everyone look small except her. She stood surrounded by a cluster of art dealers, politicians' wives, and media executives. Her platinum hair caught the light like a halo. Her dress shimmered like wet gold. She laughed at something, a perfect, practiced sound. She saw me before I saw her. The moment our eyes met, she didn't flinch, didn't frown. Her smile stayed perfectly intact, but her pupils sharpened, narrowed. Like a lion scenting blood in tall grass. "Ladies," she said sweetly, brushing an invisible speck from her dress, "excuse me for a moment. I believe someone here is looking for me." She walked toward me with the measured elegance of a queen, her hips swaying slightly, every step a threat in designer heels. I wanted to run, but I didn't. We ended up in the museum's powder room, a marble-lined sanctuary so quiet it felt like we'd entered a mausoleum. The lighting was flattering, but the silence was brutal. Ornate mirrors reflected us endlessly. 2 women in high society gowns, one trembling and one composed. Predator and prey. I stood near the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know what you're doing." She didn't respond, just removed a tube of lipstick from her clutch and began applying it slowly, like this was a casual moment between acquaintances. The phone calls, the rumors, turning clients against me. You've made your point. Isabel paused mid-stroke, then turned to face me fully. Her mask of civility didn't just slip, it shattered. Her eyes were dead cold, and her smile vanished like smoke. "My point?" she echoed. "Sweetheart, I haven't even started." I blinked. The calm malice in her voice made my skin prickle. "You think you can waltz into rooms we built and take what's not yours?" Her tone was low, intimate, the way someone might whisper a threat in bed. "You think because you clawed your way into a few boardrooms, you're untouchable?" "I earned everything I have," I said, barely above a whisper. "No," she said sharply. "You were allowed to have it. Briefly, like a pet being taught a trick, but you got greedy. You thought you could be one of us." "You don't own this world, Isabel," I said, heart pounding. "You just decorate it." That got her. For a flicker of a second, her lip twitched, and then she struck. Her hand came across my cheek so fast I didn't register it until the sound echoed around the marble room. A sharp crack that reverberated off the walls, off the mirrors, off the inside of my skull. The sting bloomed instantly, but the shame, God, the shame burned deeper. I stepped back, breath caught in my throat. "You dare threaten me?" she hissed, stepping closer until I could smell her perfume. Something expensive, powdery, laced now with the metallic tang of rage. "I own this city, darling. I own the people in it, the banks, the agencies, the mouths you beg for opportunities from." I said nothing. Couldn't. "I will end you so thoroughly," she whispered, "you'll forget you ever existed in this world. Do you understand me?" Then something behind her caught my eye, a small red light in the upper corner of the room. A camera, blinking steadily. My breath hitched. She noticed my gaze and turned, laughed. "Oh, that?" she said. "You think that will save you?" Her voice was silk and acid. "Who do you think reviews those tapes? Who do you think funds the museum's security endowment?" I should have felt crushed, but something inside me clicked instead. A shift. The rage that had been building all week, all month, uncoiled like smoke. I stood up straighter. I held her gaze. "You don't scare me," I said, and it was the truth. "You should be terrified," she replied, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes now. Doubt? No. Annoyance. She wasn't used to her target standing back up. She turned on her heel and walked out, her reflection multiplying and shrinking in every mirror she passed like a vanishing illusion. I stood alone, my cheek burning, my hands trembling, but my spine steel. It wasn't over. 2 days later, I received an email from HR. Effective immediately, my role at Marcellus & Co. was being reassessed. They phrased it as a temporary leave of absence pending internal review. No reason given, no timeline offered. My badge was deactivated that afternoon. That night, I packed up the last of my things into 2 suitcases and took the subway to Brooklyn, where Ava opened her apartment door in a robe and a face mask, took one look at me, and hugged me without a word. I broke down in her arms. I told her everything. The slap, the threats, the camera, the silence. We stayed up until 3 in the morning with takeout and red wine while she scribbled notes on napkins like she was planning a heist. "This isn't over," Ava said, pointing a chopstick at me like it was a sword. "You don't get to vanish, Nia. We're going to dig." "You think we'll find anything?" She grinned. "I know we will." She didn't say it for comfort. She said it with conviction. And somehow that made it real. The next morning, she began calling her sources, tech guys, compliance officers, even a disgruntled former employee of the Langford Foundation. She spent the day on her laptop, phone glued to her ear, muttering things like shell corporations and nonprofit tax fraud. I stayed quiet, watched, let her work. But somewhere around sunset, she turned toward me with a face pale with adrenaline. "Nia," she said, "you need to see this." She laid out a handful of documents on the table. Bank statements, scanned signatures, offshore routing numbers. It was all in Isabel's name. $12 million. Diverted from the Langford Global Education Fund to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. That money was meant for building schools in Liberia and Bangladesh, Eva said, jaw clenched. She's been skimming from her own charity for 5 years. I stared at the papers. It didn't make sense. She had everything. Money, power, reputation. Why? And then Ava slid over a final piece of paper. An article from 5 years ago, the first time Isabel had become a media darling. It featured her crying in front of a portrait of a young girl, her daughter, Amelia, who, according to the article, had died from leukemia at age 6. "She told that story at every fundraiser," I whispered. Ava nodded. "There's just one problem." She flipped to another document. "Isabel Langford never had children." The silence between us crackled. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was fraud. It was theft. It was a lie wrapped in diamonds and sold to the world as philanthropy. And I, the woman she tried to erase, now held the match that could burn it all down. Suddenly, my fall from grace wasn't a tragedy. It was a setup for something far more dangerous. Something Isabel hadn't accounted for. Me, rising again, with fire in my hands. For 2 weeks, Ava and I barely came up for air. Her kitchen table became a war room. The walls were lined with sticky notes, scribbled timelines, photocopied bank documents, and article clippings featuring Isabel Langford's sculpted face beneath headlines like "The Angel of Education" and "Billionaire's Wife Uses Tragedy for Global Change." In one glossy spread, Isabel was photographed holding hands with children in Tanzania, her eyes glassy with emotion. "Amelia would have loved this," the caption read. There was no Amelia. That was the first and cruelest lie. The child Isabel claimed to have lost to leukemia never existed. No birth certificate, no death certificate, no medical records. Ava found hospital donation records thanking Amelia's fund for their contributions, but there was no patient match in any pediatric oncology unit. A few quiet calls to contacts at the Department of Health confirmed it. There was no trace of a Langford child ever being born. The lie had power because it was tragic, and everyone had believed it. But what we discovered next made that fabrication look almost harmless. Through Ava's media connections, we got access to a leaked internal audit, one that was quickly buried a year earlier. The Langford Global Education Fund had reported discrepancies in foreign aid transfers. According to public documents, the charity had allocated over $12 million for the construction of schools, teacher training, and scholarships abroad. But the truth was sicker. The majority of those funds had been siphoned into shell corporations in Luxembourg and Belize. From there, they were funneled into a set of private accounts under fake entities tied back to Isabel's maiden name, Du Bois Consulting. No one in the IRS or the general public would have caught it without combing through international banking law. Ava did. We even had copies of the forged documents bearing Ethan Langford's signature, authorization letters, board memos, donor thank you notes. It was all there. Isabel had used her husband's name, forged his approval, and rerouted millions away from children in need. "I bet he doesn't even know," I murmured, scrolling through a set of scanned letters. Ava looked up. "He doesn't." She'd reached out to a former aide of Ethan's, someone who had quietly resigned 6 months ago after being cut out of the inner circle. The aide had seen discrepancies but was shut down. Isabel had total control over the foundation's international operations. Ethan, caught up in his tech empire, had simply signed off on everything with blind trust. "She played the grieving mother," Ava said bitterly, "because there's no easier way to cash in than martyrdom." I sat there, staring at Isabel's perfectly coiffed smile in a magazine photo, thinking about the moment she slapped me in that powder room, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can walk into our world and take what's not yours?" She said it like she was protecting some sacred order. But she wasn't protecting anything. She was stealing. I leaned back in Ava's chair, the leather creaking beneath me. "What do we do with this?" Ava's eyes sparkled with something fierce. "We burn her world down." But I wasn't ready to hand the story over. Not yet. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was the voice in my head whispering that this couldn't just be an article or a blog expose. That would let Isabel frame the narrative, control the fallout, pay for her sins in carefully calculated PR statements. No. She had ruined me publicly, and she needed to fall publicly. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. It was truth. It was restoration. And I knew exactly where it had to happen. Every spring, the Langford Global Education Fund hosted a gala at the plaza. Black tie, broadcast live, with reporters from every major outlet in attendance. It was the crowning jewel of Isabel's empire, her stage to cry on cue and collect checks with crocodile tears. 500 of the most powerful people in the city would be there, including Ethan Langford, including the donors whose money had unknowingly funded her scheme. It was 3 weeks away. "That's the night," I said quietly. Ava stopped scribbling. "You're going to take the stage." I nodded. "But how? They won't invite you." "I won't need an invitation," I said. "I just need a way in." We brainstormed late into the night. I contacted former clients, burned bridges I never thought I'd revisit. One of my ex-colleagues, Brenda, was still doing branding for a tech startup sponsoring a table at the event. She hesitated when I first called. But when I told her what Isabel had done and hinted at what I planned, her voice changed. "You'll have a +1, she said. "Just don't tell me anything else. I want plausible deniability." With entry secured, Ava and I spent the next 2 weeks building what we now called the file. It was more than documents. It was a story, a perfectly crafted presentation. Timeline graphics, screenshots, financial flowcharts, side-by-side comparisons of fake and real signatures. We color-coded evidence and wrote simple, scathing captions. We prepared hard drives, email drafts, backups in the cloud. We printed paper folders and locked them in my old fireproof box. We even recorded a contingency video, me speaking to camera, calmly explaining everything in case I never made it to the mic. But I would, because I had nothing left to lose. 2 nights before the gala, I tried on the emerald dress again, the same one I wore the night I first met Isabel. It had once made me feel like I belonged. Now it made me feel like a ghost, haunting the space I was never supposed to return to. I stood in front of the mirror, taking in the woman I'd become. I had lost everything, my job, my home, my reputation, but I had found something else in the rubble, my voice, and it was time to use it. On the day of the gala, Ava walked me to the subway. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked as I adjusted the clasp on my necklace. "She destroyed me with lies," I said. "I'll bring her down with the truth." She handed me the USB drive. "Your sword." I slipped it into my clutch and nodded. I rode the train in silence, heels wrapped in tissue paper, breath slow and deliberate. When I stepped out onto Fifth Avenue and saw the flashbulbs outside the plaza, it didn't feel real. It felt cinematic. Inside, chandeliers glistened, champagne flowed, waiters glided like shadows. Isabel was holding court near the stage in a floor-length silver gown that made her look ethereal, untouchable, until tonight. I stayed near the back, watching the stage, counting the minutes. The host gave a glowing speech about the foundation's achievements. Then, with a grand gesture and a string quartet playing softly behind him, he welcomed the heart of our mission, the woman whose story inspires it all, Isabel Langford. The crowd erupted into polite applause. She floated to the microphone, face luminous, hands clutching her speech. "My daughter, Amelia," she began. I stepped forward, clutch in one hand, microphone in the other. The sound cut through the ballroom like a blade. Her voice stopped. Everyone turned. I walked down the center aisle slowly, deliberately, like I was reclaiming something with each step. "Nia?" Isabel said, blinking. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice clear and steady, "there's something you need to know about the woman you're celebrating tonight." Gasps, whispers, a single camera zoomed in, and then I opened the file. The hush that fell over the ballroom was so complete, it felt like the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. I stood at the center of the room, my heels planted firmly on the marble floor, the microphone gripped tightly in my hand. I could feel every eye on me. 500 of Manhattan's most powerful and polished people frozen mid-toast, mid-bite, mid-lie. A room full of curated illusions now teetering on the edge of a truth none of them had expected to hear. And at the front of it all, bathed in spotlight, stood Isabel Langford. Her silver gown shimmered under the lights, her manicured fingers still wrapped around her cue cards. Her face, usually so controlled, was straining to hold the expression of calm. But I saw it. The flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her knuckles tightened around the podium, how her lips parted just slightly, as if to ask a question she suddenly couldn't remember. I cleared my throat and began. "My name is Nia Carter. Some of you may remember me as the senior brand director of Marcellus & Co. Others may have only heard the rumors. Tonight, I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to talk about her." I pointed gently, deliberately, toward Isabel. A ripple of discomfort swept through the audience. Some turned toward her, others stayed locked on me. I came to this gala tonight not because I wanted to be here, but because I needed to be. Because I couldn't let another dollar be donated, another photo taken, another story told under false pretenses. I took a deep breath. Because Isabel Langford isn't a grieving mother. She isn't a philanthropist, and she certainly isn't the savior you've all been led to believe. Gasps. Audible now. Someone dropped a fork. A woman in the second row leaned forward, eyes wide. I pulled the USB drive from my clutch and nodded toward the AV tech at the side of the room, who Brenda had quietly briefed earlier that week. He gave a tiny nod back. A few seconds later, the screen behind Isabel, once filled with slideshow images of school children and sun-drenched villages, went dark. Then, one by one, the truth began to appear. A spreadsheet, wire transfers totaling over $12 million, a set of bank account numbers tied to shell corporations, signatures that looked eerily familiar because they weren't Isabel's. They were forged in Ethan Langford's name. The room erupted in whispers. "She forged documents," I continued. "She rerouted donations meant for building schools and scholarships into private offshore accounts. She used a fake story about a daughter she never had to open your hearts and your wallets." Isabel's voice finally broke the silence. "She's lying," she cried, stepping out from behind the podium. Her voice was shrill, laced with fury. "She's a disgruntled former employee with an agenda." I didn't flinch. "If I were lying," I said, turning to the screen again, "then I wouldn't have spent the last 3 weeks compiling evidence. You'll find digital records in the cloud. Printed copies have been delivered to every major media outlet, and the FBI received the full dossier 4 hours ago." A loud murmur swept through the crowd. Isabel took a step forward, shaking her head. "You think this petty stunt will bring you redemption? You're nothing. You don't belong in this room." And there it was. The old venom. The line she loved so much. I tilted my head. "You said that to me once, right after you slapped me in the powder room at the Guggenheim. You remember that? You said I didn't belong here." The gasps turned into stunned silence. I nodded toward the back corner of the room. "There's footage. Security cameras recorded the whole thing." A reporter stood up in the back, recording on her phone. Another followed. Panic bloomed across Isabel's face like a storm cloud. Her foundation's board members, seated near the front, looked at one another in confusion, disbelief, then quiet disgust. Even Ethan Langford, seated in a tuxedo with a champagne flute half raised, had gone ghost pale. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. For a moment, Isabel looked right at him. There was a plea in her eyes, a desperate silent request for him to stand up, to defend her, to dismiss me. But Ethan stayed seated, and I kept going. "She used your names, your networks, your trust," I said. "She weaponized the very generosity she claimed to cherish. She stole from dying children, from communities that believed in her. And when I got too close, when I accidentally embarrassed her, she decided to destroy me too." Now the screen showed internal emails Ava had recovered, private conversations between Isabel and her assistants, clearly orchestrating smear campaigns. "Find a reason to remove her," one message read. "Say she's aggressive, difficult. Use the usual language. They'll believe it." My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't falter. I felt like steel. Every client who dropped me, every opportunity that vanished overnight, it wasn't coincidence. It was sabotage. I looked out across the crowd. "You don't have to believe me. Believe the evidence. The paper trail doesn't lie." A security guard stepped up to Isabel quietly. She jerked away from him. "Don't you dare touch me," she hissed. "This is my event." But the damage was done. The room was no longer hers. She turned once more toward Ethan. He stood up slowly and looked at her with hollow eyes. "I trusted you," he said quietly, then walked out. That, more than anything, broke her. By the time I left the stage, the room had exploded into chaos. Reporters calling their editors, donors making phone calls, board members demanding emergency meetings, people scrambling for explanations they knew would never come. I stepped into the hallway, heart still pounding. Ava was waiting for me there, dressed in a simple black jumpsuit, phone in hand, a proud smile on her face. "You did it?" she whispered. I nodded, emotion catching in my throat. "Let's go before someone tries to hand you a microphone again," she joked. We walked out into the night. The next morning, every major newspaper ran the story. Headlines ranged from "Queen of Charity, Caught in Corruption Scandal" to "Langford Lies Exposed, $12 million Gone." By noon, the FBI had raided the foundation's headquarters and frozen its accounts. By evening, Isabel Langford had turned herself in. And by the end of the week, I had over 100 voicemails from law firms, PR agencies, nonprofits, and journalists. Some were offering jobs. Others were asking for comment. Most just wanted to say, "We believe you now." But I didn't care about any of that. All I cared about was that the truth was no longer buried. For the first time in months, I slept a full night. No whispers, no guilt. Just the knowledge that the woman who tried to erase me had finally, irrevocably, erased herself. The morning after the gala, I woke up to the sound of Ava's coffee grinder sputtering in the kitchen and the soft ping of dozens of notifications flooding my phone. I blinked against the pale light filtering through her curtains, heart pounding like a drum. For a moment, I wasn't sure if the night before had actually happened. It felt too surreal, like some bold, dangerous dream conjured from months of fury and helplessness. But then I sat up, and reality came rushing in. I opened my inbox. There were over 300 new emails. Subject lines like, "We saw what you did, thank you." "Incredible courage, Miss Carter. We'd like to talk." "Interested in collaborating?" several job offers, 4 media requests, one from an executive at a national nonprofit who wanted to explore a new direction in leadership. The video of my confrontation with Isabel had gone viral overnight. Someone in the crowd, probably one of the reporters, had posted a short clip of me walking down the aisle, microphone in hand, the USB drive glinting in the light like a sword. They had captioned it simply, "She told the truth," and the empire crumbled. I scrolled through the comments, numb. People were calling me brave, fierce, a symbol. One comment read, "Every woman who's ever been called difficult just stood up and cheered." Another, "This is what happens when you try to bury the wrong woman." I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just stared at the screen, my chest tight with something too large to name. Relief? Justice? The unfamiliar sensation of finally being seen for who I was, and not who someone said I was. Ava came into the room with 2 mugs of coffee and slid one toward me. "You broke the internet," she said, grinning. "I think I broke Isabel more." She chuckled. "Well, you definitely broke her publicist. She's been issuing statements all morning. First it was, the allegations are exaggerated, then the investigation is ongoing, and now she's gone full meltdown mode, blaming the media, blaming the cancel culture mob." She sipped. Classic spiral. "And Ethan? He filed for divorce this morning. Statement went live at 9 a.m. sharp. He's deeply disturbed by the revelations and had no knowledge of the financial misconduct." I exhaled slowly. He didn't know. No, but he'll have to deal with what she did under his name. The next few days were a blur of fallout. Isabel Langford's carefully constructed life unraveled thread by thread. The FBI investigation escalated. Agents raided the Langford Foundation's Manhattan offices, seizing files and computers. They subpoenaed bank records. Her name disappeared overnight from the boards of every charity she once chaired. The same outlets that had praised her devotion to education now ran headlines like, "Langford Lies, How a Billionaire's Wife Fooled Us All." Her mugshot hit the front page on Thursday. She wore no makeup. Her hair was a limp version of its usual perfection. The caption underneath read, "Isabel Langford charged with wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement of charitable funds totaling $12.4 million. Bail was denied." Ava printed out the article and pinned it to our kitchen corkboard next to a post-it note that said, "You're a damn legend." I didn't feel like a legend. I felt quiet, not empty, just still. That Friday, I walked past my old office building for the first time since being pushed out. I didn't go in, just stood across the street with a paper cup of coffee in hand, watching the flow of people through the glass doors. I wondered if Miles had seen the video, if he'd felt shame, regret, or maybe just relief that I'd made the mess someone else's problem. The truth was, I no longer cared. I'd spent too long seeking validation from people who couldn't see past their own privilege. I had no interest in crawling back to them now. Instead, I walked 2 blocks east, turned a corner, and stepped into the co-working space Ava and I had quietly reserved the day after the gala. It wasn't much. Just a corner office with big windows, peeling walls, and a desk we brought in ourselves, but it felt like mine. I sat down in the creaky chair, pulled out my laptop, and opened a blank document. Across the top, I typed, "Carter Integrity Group." Underneath, helping individuals and organizations fight back against workplace injustice, discrimination, and corporate retaliation. The idea had been circling in my head since the first client dropped me, since I realized how little protection people actually had when someone powerful decided to sabotage their reputation, since I watched the entire system fold on command at the whisper of a wealthy woman's disapproval. I wanted to build something that wouldn't fold, a firm that stood beside the people no one else believed. Not just women like me, but whistleblowers, employees fired for speaking up, workers silenced by NDAs and fear. By the end of the week, we had a name, a logo, a website, and 3 potential clients. 2 women from major firms who'd seen the video and reached out saying, "I think I'm next." It grew faster than I could have imagined. Within 3 months, we had a full calendar and a waiting list. We partnered with employment lawyers, HR consultants, digital security experts. Ava helped with PR and press strategy. I took on the cases that felt personal, each one a small war, each one a chance to build something better than what we'd been given. One day, a woman walked into my office in tears. She'd been labeled difficult by her firm after rejecting her manager's advances. They called her unstable, started leaking false performance reviews. When she reported it, they put her on unpaid leave. She said she saw my video on the worst night of her life and it made her want to fight back. I gave her coffee and a plan. By the time she left, she wasn't crying anymore. And for the first time, I understood what power really felt like. It wasn't money or access or a private jet. It was handing someone the truth, wrapping it like armor, and saying, "Here, let's go to war together." 2 years passed like that. In the fall of the second year, I came back to the office after a meeting to find an envelope sitting on my desk. No name, just my address scribbled in elegant cursive. Inside was a letter from Isabel Langford's legal team. She was applying for parole and requesting character references. They wanted me to speak on her behalf. I stared at the page in stunned silence. The audacity was almost impressive. The woman who had called me nothing, tried to destroy my life, and built her empire on lies, now wanted me to help her re-enter the world. Ava walked in, glanced at the envelope, and arched an eyebrow. "Well, that's bold." I laughed, a quiet, tired laugh that surprised even me. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the letter. When the assistant answered, I said clearly, "You can tell Miss Langford I received her request." Pause. "And," I smiled, then said the words I've been waiting 2 years to say. "People like her don't deserve second chances," and I hung up. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, the one I had paid for with my own business, in my own name, watching the city lights flicker against the dark. Somewhere in that skyline, people were telling stories about me. Some would call me dangerous, some would call me inspiring. But I knew who I was. I wasn't the girl they fired. I wasn't the victim they silenced. I was the woman who stood in front of an empire, looked it in the eye, and set it on fire, and then walked away from the ashes without looking back. 8 months after the night I stood in the plaza and tore Isabel Langford's world apart, I found myself in the quiet, unfamiliar calm of my new office, an open loft in Soho, all exposed brick and tall windows that spilled light onto worn hardwood floors. There was a coffee machine humming in the corner, a soft jazz playlist drifting from Ava's speakers, and the low murmur of phone calls being answered by our small but fiercely committed team. Carter Integrity Group was no longer an idea scribbled on a post-it note in a kitchen at midnight. It was real. It had weight. We were booked solid for months. Companies reaching out to fix what they'd broken, employees who'd finally found the courage to come forward, and a growing list of allies who believed in what we were doing. Building a safer, stronger workplace culture rooted in truth and accountability. And yet, in the middle of all that triumph, the past found a way to knock on my door. It was Ava who handed me the envelope. I was sorting through client case files when she appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "This came in the mail?" she said softly. "No return address." I took the envelope and turned it over. It was made of thick, cream-colored stock. Embossed in the corner was the emblem of the New York State Correctional Facility for Women. My chest tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a letter, not typed, but handwritten in a fine looping cursive. It was from Isabel. She had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The trial had been short, the evidence overwhelming. She had stood in court like a statue, silent, unsmiling, and surrounded by attorneys who spoke more than she ever did. I hadn't attended her sentencing. I hadn't needed to. I already knew the end of her story. Or so I thought. In the letter, Isabel asked me for help. She was applying for early parole and needed a statement of character, a letter from someone who could vouch for her remorse, her personal growth, her journey of reflection. She had the audacity to write, "Despite our past, I believe you understand how power can change a person. I've changed. I hope you'll help others see that too." I stared at the page, stunned by the sheer boldness of it. I had no idea what kind of world she thought we lived in, where forgiveness was a transaction and accountability a PR move. But clearly she hadn't learned as much as she claimed. Later that evening, Ava found me at the window, the letter still clutched in my hand. "She really asked you?" Ava said, half incredulous, half disgusted. "She thinks I might help her," I replied. "Or maybe she just wants to see if I still remember how it felt to be erased. You're not seriously considering it?" I shook my head. "No, But I want to say something, not for her, for me. I sat down and wrote my reply by hand, not because I believed she deserved the respect of a personal note, but because I wanted her to read every word in the ink of my own making. I began with her favorite phrase. You said I didn't belong. You said it with your smile, your wealth, your whisper campaigns. You said it when you turned people against me, when you forged your husband's signature, when you poured lies into charity banquets like vintage wine. You built your reputation on a tragedy you invented, and when I became inconvenient, you tried to erase me too. You called me difficult. You labeled me aggressive. You smiled while you buried me beneath your lies. But I survived, and then I did what you could never have done. I told the truth. Now you ask me to speak for you. To use my voice, my hard-won, blood-tested voice, to humanize you to the same system you exploited. No, you had everything. Power, wealth, access. You could have chosen to do real good. Instead, you chose vanity, control, and cruelty. And now you're asking for grace from the very woman you tried to destroy? I will not hand you the softness you never offered anyone else. People like you don't deserve second chances. I sealed the letter and dropped it in the mailbox the next morning. And with it, I let go of something I hadn't even realized I'd still been holding. The last strand of my old fear. From that day forward, the air felt clearer. Not long after, we were invited to speak at a national summit on corporate ethics. It was a surreal experience, being on a panel with CEOs who had once brushed past me like I was invisible. They asked thoughtful questions. They listened when I spoke. One of them even quoted something I'd written on our website. Transparency is not a trend. It's a commitment to being human where power says you don't have to be. After the panel, a young woman approached me. She looked like she could have been me 10 years ago, bright-eyed, nervous, full of questions. "Miss Carter," she said, holding out a trembling hand. "You probably hear this a lot, but your story changed the way I see everything. I want to work in ethics now, because of you." I smiled, took her hand and said, "Then make it count. Tell the truth, even when it costs you." A few months later, a story broke in the business press. Ethan Langford had formally dissolved the foundation and pledged a new charitable initiative, fully transparent, independently audited, and built in partnership with real grassroots educators. He didn't use Isabel's name. He didn't mention the past. But the gesture was clear. Even empires, it seemed, could change course once they were forced to see what they'd been standing on. The city that had once turned its back on me now watched me rise. I walked into meetings with the kind of poise I used to pretend to have. I sat at tables where I no longer felt the need to prove my worth. I didn't need anyone's permission to belong. And sometimes, late at night, when the office was quiet and the streets outside buzzed with taxi horns and distant sirens, I would look out at the skyline and remember how close I came to losing everything. But I hadn't lost. I'd transformed. And now, I wasn't just protecting my name, I was using it to protect others. One day, Ava and I were sitting on the office balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap champagne from the bodega downstairs, the kind we used to buy in college when we were dreaming about lives that looked nothing like this. "To you," she said, raising her glass, "for setting the record straight, for torching the lie and walking out with the truth." I clinked my glass against hers. "To us," I said, "for building something better in its place." We drank as the sun dipped behind the buildings, the last light of day catching on the glass towers that once made me feel small. They didn't anymore. Because I had stood in front of power, held up a mirror, and made it see itself. And no one, not Isabel, not the companies who betrayed me, not the voices who once doubted me, could ever take that away. 2 years had passed since the night I walked down that marble aisle, armed with nothing but a microphone and the truth. 2 years since I'd looked a billionaire's wife in the eye and dismantled her empire word by word. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest memories, but that night remained carved into my bones, not because of the applause or the headlines or even the fallout, but because it was the moment I stopped shrinking. Now, I stood backstage at a theater in D.C., minutes away from delivering the closing keynote at the National Summit on Workplace Justice. 1,000 people sat beyond the curtain, activists, lawyers, executives, students. I'd seen the guest list. People who once wouldn't take my calls were now requesting meetings. A year ago, I would have laughed at the irony. Tonight, I felt something deeper: responsibility. Ava was beside me, adjusting my lapel mic, her movements calm and practiced. "You've done harder things," she said with a wink. "Remember? Like surviving Manhattan." I smiled. That was a different kind of battlefield. She stepped back and gave me a thumbs up. "Kill it." I walked out to warm applause and a sea of expectant faces. The lights were soft, the stage wide. I took my time crossing it, heels steady, breath even. I wasn't there to perform, I was there to testify. "My name's Nia Carter," I began. "I used to be a senior marketing executive. Now, I run a firm that helps people fight back against workplace injustice and corporate retaliation. But before any of that, before the press coverage or the viral video, I was just someone who believed that if you worked hard enough, no one could take anything from you." I paused, let the words settle. I was wrong. I told them about Isabel Langford, not as a villain in a cautionary tale, but as a symptom of something larger. A system built to protect the powerful and punish the truth-tellers. I told them about the clients I'd lost, the doors that closed, the silence that followed. I told them about the moment I realized talent wasn't armor. And then I told them about the moment I decided I wasn't going to be erased. As I spoke, I could feel the room leaning in. Not out of sympathy, but because they saw themselves somewhere in the story. The young woman near the front, with her fists clenched. The man scribbling notes with furious precision. The group of HR leaders whispering to each other with eyes wide. When I finished, the applause wasn't polite. It was electric. It vibrated through the floorboards. And for a moment, I stood there, not as someone who had been broken and rebuilt, but as someone who had become unbreakable. Afterward, I met a woman outside the theater who looked to be in her 50s, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She shook my hand and said, "I've been in corporate law for 30 years. I've never seen anyone tell it like that." I nodded. "We've all learned how to survive in silence. I'm just done being quiet." On the train ride home, Ava pulled up an article on her phone and handed it to me. It was a small blurb buried inside a local New York outlet. "Langford parole denied," the headline read. Isabel had tried again, her second petition in 12 months. The board cited lack of demonstrated remorse and continued refusal to accept responsibility. The judge's statement was scathing. I handed the phone back to Ava without a word and stared out the window at the blur of city lights. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like closure. Back in the office that Monday, I found a new envelope on my desk. No return address again, but I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. It wasn't from Isabel this time. It was from Ethan Langford. The letter was short, precise. "Miss Carter, I watched everything fall apart 2 years ago and said nothing. I didn't know what Isabel had done, but I also didn't ask. I didn't look. That was my choice. My cowardice. And I've carried that silence like a stone ever since. You exposed more than her crimes. You exposed our complicity. For that, I thank you. It cost me more than I imagined, but it was a debt long overdue. I hope you keep building what she tried to destroy. E.L." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my bottom drawer, alongside a copy of the original gala program and a photo Ava had taken of me on the night of my first office opening. I didn't need his gratitude, but it felt like another wall crumbling in a city full of facades. By the end of the year, Carter Integrity Group had expanded into 3 new cities. We were partnering with universities, nonprofits, even a few corporations who wanted to proactively address systemic bias instead of just reacting to lawsuits. Our client list included whistleblowers, founders, mid-level managers, and janitors. Justice didn't care about job titles. Neither did we. Every now and then, someone would stop me on the street or send me a message online. Most said some version of, "You made me feel like I wasn't alone." That was enough. But it wasn't just about the big cases anymore. It was about the quiet victories, like helping a single mother win back pay after being fired for reporting harassment, or consulting for a company that chose to implement anonymous reporting protocols company-wide, or mentoring a first-gen college student who wanted to go into organizational change because she watched my TED Talk. The work was slow, often exhausting, but it mattered, and it made every lie, every slap, every loss I'd endured feel like a seed that had bloomed into something no one, not even Isabel Langford, could take away. One evening, as the office emptied and the sky turned soft with dusk, I stood alone in the conference room, gazing out at the skyline that had once tried to spit me out. Now it felt like something I had earned. Not with charm or shortcuts or old family names, but with truth, with grit, with the sheer force of choosing not to disappear. I remembered the way my hands had trembled that night at the gala. I remembered the sound of my own voice shaking as I called out injustice in front of a room full of people who thought they were untouchable. And I remembered the silence that followed, right before everything changed. I reached for a pen and wrote a note on a clean sheet of paper. A note I didn't plan to send, but needed to write anyway. Dear Isabel, I don't hate you anymore. But I don't forgive you either. Forgiveness is an ode, especially not to those who weaponized privilege and power for their own gain. You thought you could rewrite my story. Instead, you became the footnote in mine. I hope you one day understand the difference. Then I folded the note and tucked it into the same drawer as the others. There was no need to revisit it again, because my story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. And in reclaiming my voice, my dignity, my future, I had already won. Not in the way Isabel once defined winning, with applause and op-eds and photo shoots, but in the quiet, steady way that truth wins, slowly, irrevocably, and on its own damn terms. As I turned off the lights and stepped into the night, the city buzzed around me, alive and unbothered. I walked toward it with no fear, no shame, no more need for approval, just purpose. And that, more than anything else, was the most powerful thing I'd ever carried. Nia Carter's journey is more than just a tale of downfall and redemption. It's a powerful reminder of what it means to stand up when the world tries to silence you. She teaches us that truth is not just a concept. It's a weapon, a shield, and ultimately, a path to freedom. When the system favored the powerful, when lies traveled faster than facts, and when reputation was manipulated like currency, Nia chose not to shrink. She chose to rise. In a society where women, especially women of color, are often labeled as too much for daring to speak, Nia's courage was revolutionary. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait to be believed. She turned the very tools used against her into instruments of justice. Her story reminds us that resilience isn't just about surviving injustice. It's about using it to build something stronger, for yourself and for others. It's about knowing that even when you lose everything, your integrity is the one thing no one can take from you, unless you let them. So whether you're facing discrimination, betrayal, or the crushing weight of being underestimated, remember this: you are not powerless. The truth, when spoken with clarity and courage, can shake even the tallest towers. Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you of your own strength, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story that speaks to the soul. Because here we don't just tell stories. We honor truth, we honor resilience, we honor you.